begin, how many of you have ever visited the Smithsonian Museum? Okay. So, about 5 years ago, I visited the Smithsonian while on a family trip on the East Coast. And while there, I visited the Space and Air Museum. And I saw Charles Lindbergh's plane on exhibit. So, just to give you a little background, Charles Lindbergh was the first aviator or pilot to fly from New York across the Atlantic into Paris, so to a different country. I've been studying extensively on the life of Charles Lindbergh, so I can talk about it. So I hope by learning more about Charles Lindbergh, we're able to really see the impact he left on a pilot standpoint and also technologically speaking, because now how many people take planes every day? So first I will discuss a little bit about his early life, followed by his famous flight heard around the world, and lastly the impact he left. So to begin, who was Charles Lindbergh? So Charles Lindbergh was born on February 4th, 1902 in Detroit, Michigan. At a young age, a really young age, around 12 years old, he had a really distinct knack on mechanics. He loved mechanics and he knew his way around. So at an early age, he knew what he wanted to do with the rest of his life had to do with mechanics, specifically aviation. When he was 18 years old, he attended the University of Wisconsin, where he studied engineering. Within 2 years in college, he actually dropped out and he became a barnstormer, which is a pilot who is basically a stunt man, which performs at fairs. And in 1924, he joined the Army in order to become a pilot reserve. And in 1925, he actually graduated from flight school at the top of his class as being the best pilot. And he never really joined the Army after that. What he did was he was hired by a private organization where he delivered mail on a plane from Chicago to Illinois. Now that I've talked a little bit about his background, I will now discuss his famous flight. According to editor Scott Berg, in his 1998 New York Times article, in 1919, a really famous hotel owner named Raymond Ortiz came up with this competition where he decided that the first pilot to fly from New York to Paris would win $250,000. That's a lot of money, especially at that time. So he actually did it just for his own purposes, to sponsor his hotels, because he decided, okay, if I come up with this competition, then there's going to be more, it's going to enhance my business more. So actually a lot of pilots took on this competition, but unfortunately all of them died, because it was never heard of for a pilot to travel across the Atlantic. At that time, we take a boat. But in 1927, Charles Lindbergh decided to take the challenge. So what he did was he took on a different approach. He believed that the technology at that time for planes wasn't really good enough to travel that long. So what he did was, with the help of a lot of sponsors in San Diego, and with his knack of mechanics, he decided to build his own plane. So in 1927, he traveled to San Diego, and they built the plane. So in order to test it, what he did was he flew from San Diego to New York with one stop at St. Louis. And he accomplished this flight in record-breaking time. So he decided to name his plane the Spirit of St. Louis. And on May 20th, 1927 of that year, he actually took on the challenge. He started from Roosevelt Field near New York, and he sailed off, or took off, on May 21st at 7:52 a.m. And he actually arrived, he made it, he actually arrived near Paris in Bourget Field the same day at 10:21 p.m. And there you see if you could see, there you see him taking off, and before the takeoff and during his flight. Now that I talked to you about his flight, I'm going to talk to you about his impact he left. Now, according to editor John Ward, in his 1958 New York Times article, Lindbergh received a lot of fame and recognition throughout, not only the U.S., but throughout the world, because it was unheard of, like I said. So, he received the Congressional Medal of Honor and also the Flying Cross from President Coolidge. And his fame didn't stop there. Like I said, he was famous, and a lot of pilots from specific organizations, and especially the Army, wanted him to basically train them, because he was renowned as the best pilot ever. So, but he actually declined, and he actually lived like a normal person, because he felt he didn't want the fame to begin with. He felt that, okay, he already accomplished his flight, so there's no reason for me to get more fame. That was his mindset. He thought he already contributed to the world, so he didn't need that fame. Now that I talked to you about the aftermath, let me talk to you about what he really means to not only aviation, but also the world. Okay. Now, where's that? Now, according to Charles Lindbergh Organization website called The Spirit of St. Louis II, in their online biography, achieved on April 27, 2014, Lindbergh is still renowned today as being the best pilot, not only in that generation, but also in today's generation. Like I said, a lot of people every day take plane rides, a 16-hour plane ride, and they end up halfway around the world. Now, none of this would have been possible without Lindbergh's contribution. At that time, flying that distance was never heard of. So he really broke the barrier on what was possible, and became a pioneer and a hero. And we still talk about him today, so imagine how great he was. Now, in order to conclude, so I first talked about Charles Lindbergh's early history, his early life. Then I talked about his famous flight, and I also talked about his contribution he left. Now, by learning about Charles Lindbergh, I hope that we all have a little bit of understanding of how much of a pioneer, hero, and revolutionary he was. And so next time you walk outside and you see a plane, you remember how those pilots got their start.